What's up, guys? Welcome back again. Today we're going to expand and do a similar thing that we did last time, where I'm going to talk about training programs. And I'm not trying to convince you of anything or sell you on anything. This is just so that you can understand the basic principles that go into designing programs, what makes them work, what makes them effective, and then what you need to think about and worry about. And I had two different titles for this. I couldn't think of which one is going to be more effective or make more sense. So I'm going to use them both. Keep things simple. I'm going to show you how. And then all training programs are the same. They boil down to the exact same things, ultimately, as to what makes them effective or ineffective and how effective they work. So just as a recap of a couple of things we touched on in the nutrition video, this graph here, figuring out your current body type, high fat versus low fat, high muscle versus low muscle, and where you fall on that graph. So somebody that is very low muscle, very low fat would be skin and bones. Somebody that's higher fat, but very low muscle would be that skinny fat that we feel. Somebody that's high fat, high muscle would be big. Somebody with very low fat, very high muscle would be like a professional bodybuilder. And somebody that's normal and pretty good muscle mass would be fit to jacked range, just as an example. Then what you do is you figure out where you want to be on the chart based off of where you are, and then what you need to do to get there. So you could draw a line across. So if right now, if you're skin and bones and you want it to be big like the mountain in Game of Thrones, you would travel in that direction. If you are skinny fat and you want to gain muscle and decrease body fat, you would travel down into the right here. And this is going to tell you what you need to do to get there. So if I'm in the top left and I want to get to the bottom right, I would draw a line here, and this tells you what to do. To move in that direction, I would need to increase volume and decrease calories. Boom. And that's it. That's simple. Go back and watch the other video to go a little more in depth. I also touched on this. To change your body type, 99% of people only need these three things. You only need to know worry about three things. 1, calories. How many total on average are you having each day? 2, protein. How much are you having daily? And then 3, volume. Resistance strength training volume. How much strength training are you doing on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis? Those are the only things that you really need to know to change your body type. Things you don't need to worry about: cardio, how much cardio you're doing, circuits, metcons, boot camps, HIIT training, strict diet rules or cheat meals, or whether or not you're in ketosis, or how many grams of carbs you have, or whatever. None of that stuff actually matters. You just want to worry about those 3 key variables, but you got to know them. And today what we're talking about is volume, number 3, because I didn't touch on it in the last video. So here's the big statement and big piece that if you understand it, everything becomes easy to figure out. The effectiveness of any program boils down to a dose-response relationship. How much input do you need to get the desired output? How much work do you need to do to get the end result? Balancing that. That's all it is, a dosage and a response. Nothing more. So we have this same general idea, the same graphs, and they all go together. So I swapped out muscle mass and volume, which right here, I swapped out the calories and gaining or losing body fat for strength and building or decreasing strength. So on this axis, we have lose muscle, build muscle. On this one, we have build strength and lose strength. So an example of somebody that is losing muscle mass and losing strength, it's because they're doing zero weight training. Somebody that's building both strength and muscle, they might be doing 4 sets of resistance training at above 80%, just as an example. The next one here we have the one that goes with it. So if I want to build strength, build muscle, I need to higher intensities or heavier is going to build strength. Lower intensities or lighter is going to lose strength. More total volume is going to build mass, and lesser total volume is going to lose mass. So if I'm small and weak, it's because I'm doing low volume at low intensity or 0. If I want to get big and strong, I got to do higher intensities or heavier and higher total volumes. So I would move in that direction. And that's how it works. Now, 2 things to understand. 1, lower volume of work, meaning fewer sets, at higher loads, meaning heavier weights. So it's a low time under tension. That's how you build strength. Higher reps at lower loads with higher time under tension is how you build muscle, hypertrophy. Now, you're going to do both through the entire range in the entire scope. You're going to build muscle by building strength, and you're going to get stronger by building muscle. However, this is a differentiation for our graph, which will matter. For strength, typically loads are above 85%. Reps per set is 1 to 4 reps. Reps in a total workout would only be somewhere between 4 and 20, ideally just between 7 to 15. So you would only do maybe 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 4, and that would be it. And you'd hit it more often. But that would be it for your strength session. Now, if you're trying to do hypertrophy, building muscle, the loads would be somewhere between 60 and 85%, usually 70% and above. The further you go below 70%, the harder it is to actually build muscle. You would do somewhere between 6 to 15 reps per set, 3 or 4 sets per workout, and only 8 to 12 sets per week. That's it. Simple as that for those 2 categories. That's how you build strength. That's how you build muscle mass. So here's an example of a progression where we're measuring all of these things so you can look at it. On workout number 1, doesn't matter what the lift is. They do 100 pounds for 8 reps, and they do 3 sets, once, twice, 3 times. 100 pounds times 8 reps is 800 pounds. 800 pounds 3 times is 2,400 pounds lifted. That's their volume. So they can progress that workout in a number of ways. They can either add reps. So on the first set, they did 10 instead of 8. Then they did 100 for 8 and 100 for 8. So it's 1,800, 800, which means they did 2,600 pounds of total volume instead of 2,400. 200 pounds more in volume. That's more volume. They could increase the load. So here's an example. If they did 110 pounds in the first set instead of 100. So they did 110 for 8, then 100 for 8, and 100 for 8, which is 2,480 total pounds of volume, which is 80 pounds more volume. Or they could add a set. So they did 1, 2, 3 sets of 8, and then they added a 4th set, and they only got 6 reps. That's 3,000 pounds of total volume, which is an increase, 600 pounds more. Which one's better? Doesn't matter. And we're not going to answer that right now because remember, these are all made up numbers on a made up lift. There's not enough specific information. Just because this one is an increase in 600 for total volume doesn't necessarily mean it's better or right. These are just examples of how you would do a progression to fit what we're doing here to get bigger and stronger. That's it. And if you follow a progression like that continuously, that's how you're going to get stronger and build muscle. Nothing more complicated than that. Every great program includes these things: a push, a pull, a bend, a squat, a lunge, and a core exercise. Those are the main 6. You don't even have to, I'm covering up the screen, you can't see it. You don't even have to worry about anything on this side, really. That would be the next level of things that you would add. But the best, most complete programs would include a rotation and an anti-rotation, something that would be gait-oriented, a carry, a swing, and then some aerobic piece, which is not the same as a cardio workout. This is it. Every good program that exists, that's ever been written, includes these things. And if it doesn't include them, you know there's a huge problem in it. So here's an example of a strength session that you might see at the gym, especially if you're following our protocols. You do a squat, a deadlift, which is a bend, lunges, bench press, which is push, bent rows, which is pull, overhead press, which is push, leg raises, which would be core. 3 times per week, and you get 10,000 steps per day. So that's your aerobic and your gait. This would be a standard workout that you would see tons of strength programs that fits into this. Another example would be Orange Theory. So I just looked up Orange Theory workout today, and we can grab a bunch of them. I guess you can't fully see what I'm talking about here. Here you go. So if you click on any of them, they do squat, squat, calf raise, plank, core. We go here. This looks like a warm-up, but it's still the same movements: core, squat, lunge, squat, lunge, 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 squat. If we pull up this here, swing, squat, squat, twist, core, sit up, core, core, push up, push, push, lunge, twist, crunch. All of the exact same movements over and over and over again, because that's what makes programs effective. That's what is in all good programs. Then here's an example of a CrossFit program. Push, pull, core. Running, aerobic, and a gait. Push, pull, lunge, core. Running, which is aerobic, and a gait. Push, pull, lunge, core. I'm realizing I just Googled a random one, but still, this is exactly the same movements over and over and over again. You can add different variables to it. You can do barbells, dumbbells, body weight, whatever, but it's those same things over and over and over again. That's what every program is. Just those things repeated over and over. Now, they have to, or whoever writes them, whoever's coaching them, has to understand these principles, and they have to follow these principles. Progressive overload. You have to continuously overload in order to get stronger and bigger. That's the increase in volume and increase in intensity. So if I scroll back up real quick and show you the example here, the volume is going up, or the weight is going up, which is higher intensity. As I get stronger, the intensities or numbers that I lift need to get higher in order to continue to push up the intensity chain, and the volumes need to continue to climb. That is progressive overload. If you are not measuring the volume and the intensity, and it's not incrementally moving forward per phase, you're not going to get stronger and you're not going to build muscle. No matter what, no matter how hard you try, those principles have to be applied. The said principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. Now, this is where individuality and specificity come in. It has to be something specific, targeted, focused, hitting the progressive overload, the right movements at the right time, the right frequency, which we'll talk about, that you need specific to your goal. And then variation and adaptation. You are going to adapt to the specific demands imposed on your body. How you adapt will determine what variation you'll apply to your program to further create the desired adaptation. So if I listed that example strength training session, it had 8 movements or 7 movements. The variation within that workout, how you respond to it and what comes next, is important, and it needs to be individual and specific. If you've got a bunch of random versions of squats and they change all the time, that's probably too much variation. You're not going to be able to effectively, progressively overload it, and you're not going to get the specific adaptation you're looking for. Regularity and frequency, and then reversibility. So you want to be able to repeat things regularly at a high frequency in order to get the specific adaptation that you're looking for and progressively overload it. And if you don't, you run into its reversibility or regression. So here's an example. If you want to get better at something in CrossFit like cleans and snatch and pull-ups, but you work on it like once every 10 days, it doesn't have enough regularity or frequency for you to actively build, and the day that you work on it, there's too long in between it, and you're going to regress all the way back down to the starting point, and you'll never be able to get above it. Periodization, if there's not phases that stack on each other, like accumulation, intensification, then you're probably doing something that's more random, which makes hitting all of the other principles more difficult. You're not going to create the adaptation if they're not progressive, in order, periods, focused, and adjusted on the outcome that you get. Rest and recovery. If you're just doing too much random work and you're not actually recovering between workouts, you're not going to get better. And then the length tension curve and length tension relationships. This comes down to technique and load, and full range of motion and proper form, and how much that impacts what you're doing. A super simple example might be doing like dumbbell lateral raises, and whether or not you're strictly going through the movements and what is the full range of where you do one tension and don't, versus somebody that's rocking their back and swinging them up and down and using the wrong muscles, right? So all those things go into it. And I'm going to go in depth on all these principles in the future, but all of these principles have to be accounted for. And if you can't recognize in a program how all of these principles are being hit, that's a problem. If your coach can't explain it to you, that's a problem. If your coach doesn't have them in there, or the program you're following doesn't have them in there, then you know that's an issue. So all great programs follow these principles. There's no program that exists that doesn't follow these principles. There are a bunch of different things that you can do, though, in terms of program design that might make them look different and unique and exciting, but they still boil down to those principles and those basic movements that we talked about earlier. So you could focus on eccentrics or concentric or isometrics. You could do circuits and supersets and drop sets and cluster sets and AMRAPs to accumulate your volume. You could do tempos and giant sets of things, which would, circle back into circuits and hit different type of muscle contractions. You could load it in different ways. unilateral, bilateral, ipsilateral, contralateral. You could split your workout programming weekly by doing full body every day, split routines, muscle specific routines. You could add different types of periodization and phases with different types of biases. You can do all kinds of cool stuff, but ultimately it's still the same core things over and over and over again. And these are just different ways of creating what we talked about earlier. So these are just creative variables, but they still boil down to the exact same things. Now, here's a list of things that we usually worry about way too much that end up messing us up if we're trying to change our body type. First one is cardio. I didn't go over cardio in the previous one with nutrition because it doesn't impact your ability to change your body type. And it doesn't impact it in this video either because it's total calories, total protein, and total volume of work. So if you're worried about how much cardio you're doing or you think you need to do cardio, that's a mistake. The calorie burn per workout, how many calories you burn in a workout, who cares? Don't worry about it. If you're hitting your calories, hitting your protein, you're hitting your volume, your body type's going to change. If you start worrying about cardio and calorie burn, it's probably going to screw you up. Soreness, how sore you are is not a factor on how effective a workout is. And more sore doesn't mean better. It's usually a mistake when people are like, oh, I'm not as sore as I thought I would be, and they miss it. Well, that's a bad feedback. Whether or not you're out of breath and exhausted and collapsing onto the floor, that doesn't actually determine whether or not it was an effective workout, certainly not towards your goals. It just means, how tired you are. How hard it is or how hard you try, meaning you just go balls to the wall and push yourself to puke or whatever, or how difficult it was for you. If you thought the workout was hard or easy, doesn't actually matter towards the outcome. It's just the basic principles, volume and intensity, and sticking to that pattern. Doing more or as much as possible is always a mistake. It means, going hard every single day or forcing out extra reps per set, where you break down technique and form. It's just trash volume at that point. And then how fast you did it. How quickly did you get through your circuit or your exercise race or whatever your strength stuff is today. That doesn't matter either, except for unless you're in a time crunch and then you want to get it done faster. But it's not body type outcome dependent. Important things to understand. There's no such thing as a weight loss or a fat loss exercise or exercise program. It's not how it works. And not all weight loss is the same, okay? All exercise impacts the energy equation, making all weight changes nutrition dependent. So there's no such thing as a weight loss or fat loss exercise or a weight loss or fat loss exercise program. All it does is impact the energy equation, which is still nutrient dependent. So you have to do nutrition, tracking, accuracy, calories, protein. And not all weight loss is the same. So if you're ignoring the volume and intensity chart like we did earlier, and you're focused on cardio, calorie burn, soreness, and being out of breath, you're going to lose weight if you're controlling your diet and focusing on these things. The problem is that it's probably going to be a lot more lean mass than you want it to be. So 25 pounds of fat mass and then somebody that loses 12 pounds of fat and 12 pounds of muscle, the aesthetic in the end would look different. The body type would look different. And obviously the person that maintained lean mass and lost all fat mass would have a much better aesthetic, one that they're aiming for. So it matters a ton. Most people respond to less. Very few people respond to more, which means for almost all of us watching this video, everyday people, 8 to 12 hard sets per week per muscle group, and that's it. Maybe 15, rarely, if required, which I'm not even going to get in depth on. But if you do something like 4 sets of back squat and 4 sets of front squat, 8 reps each set, alternating back and forth, as heavy as you can handle on Monday, and then you do squat cleans on another day, and a Metcon that has some sort of leg in it twice and then sprints the following day. That is just so much excessive volume that's not creating a positive adaptation for you. That's doing as much as you possibly can, focusing on soreness, out of breath, and just simply doing as much as possible. It's ignoring the dose response relationship. A greater dosage doesn't mean a greater response, and blindly jacking up the volume doesn't mean more muscle mass is built or more strength is built. So it's what dosage creates what response. And this is the dosage that will create the best response often enough that it would be foolish not to place your bet there. So the ranges that people, study and say how many sets per week is best for building muscle. And that range really goes from like 8 to 20. But 20 is really for elites and professionals. And for most of us, we'll never get there because we don't have the time, because we have full-time jobs elsewhere. We're not as active. It just is what it is. Who cares? 15 even is probably too high for most everyday people in terms of, we're talking about dosage. And think of it just like medicine. If it's 200 milligrams of ibuprofen is the minimum effective dosage, and that's the right dosage for most people, then you should assume that's you, and you should take that much dosage until it doesn't work. That would be a dose-response relationship. Doing more and crushing yourself doesn't necessarily mean better. What we want is how much input is required to create the desired output. And the 3 variables that we went over earlier answer that question. How much input is required? Calorie targets, I gave you the graph. Protein targets, I gave you the math. Volume and intensity, I gave you the math. The rep ranges, sets per week, that's it. If you just focus on those things, you're going to be wildly successful. And you'll notice that all great programs that are consistently effective over time hit those. There is something called the Newbie Gains or Newbie Progress, which means if you haven't been doing much of anything or something's new, you're going to make a lot of progress on it regardless, just because you're new and you're going to adapt to anything. So if we go back to the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, and there was no imposed demand or stressor before, it doesn't matter what you do, it's always going to work. So when we would do a lot of CrossFit stuff, and when I was coaching in the past, and anybody that's, joined one of those programs for 3 months up to 3 years, it doesn't matter what they do, they're just constantly making progress. But eventually it's going to level off and stop if you're not accounting for all of those principles, two of which would be the progressive overload for total volume and total intensity. That's how it always works. That's where you get stuck, and that's where things need to be adjusted. One last thing to touch on real quick before I wrap this video up, and I've got like 30 more planned to go in depth on other things. If this is you say things to me like, I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I feel like I should be doing more. First and foremost, you have to hit those key principles. You have to hit the calories, the protein, and the volume, and then you have to hit that list of principles I hit earlier. If you're not tracking and you're not measuring, you don't know whether or not you're hitting them. If you don't know outside of, tracking and measuring whether or not you're hitting them, your coach can answer it for you. If you don't have a coach, you get a coach, but make sure you're hitting those key principles. And if you are, then simply follow the progressions, and eventually you'll get to progressive overload. So if you're not doing enough in terms of not enough reps at not enough weight, if you just increase it every week and every phase and every workout, eventually you're going to get to a point where you're hitting the right thing, and eventually it's going to progressively overload. So if you're just patient, it will fall into place. 8 to 12 sets per week per body part, as long as you're increasing volume per phase and being accurate with your nutrition, it's going to work eventually. So if you feel like you're not doing enough now, I don't know whether or not it's true, but stick to the path and increase the loads per set and hit your sets with high frequency, and that's it. Don't try to do more by jamming more sets into a workout. Don't try to do more by doing circuits and cardio and metcons. That's not actually going to help you. If anything, it's just going to create drag and slow you down. It's going to have a negative effect. Just be accurate with those things over and over and over again for those first 6 exercises that I listed, and that's all you're going to need to worry about as long as you stick with it. A sign of a great coach for somebody that's been doing a lot and struggling. They've been doing boot camp and CrossFit and Orange Theory and strength training. They've been doing all these different programs. They've been going hard for a very long time. If you find a new coach and you've been trying for years, all those things making no progress, you can tell that they're a great coach if they simplify it, shrink it down to those 6 movements, 3 days per week, super simple nutrition, and they tell you stick to that for 3 months, don't do anything else. Because that's going to solve a lot of the problems that you may have been running into and clear things up for you and set you on the right path. If you start a new program, you get a new coach, and they've got like 16 different exercises that they're throwing at you per week and per circuit, and everything's changing, and it's high intensity or like intensity of I'm out of breath, and it's fast and it's switching it up. They don't actually understand any of the physiology, any of the adaptations that they're going to get, any of the metrics, any of the science, and they don't understand the compensation or sustainability over long term, right? It's pretty clear in those situations. But there's so much push in fitness and exercise and health to do more, go hard, do circuits, do cardio, that it's difficult to sift through all of the crap. But most of the stuff that you're hearing out there that pushes you to do that is complete crap. This is how all effective programs work. Even if you're doing, circuits and boot camps and CrossFits and you're mixing it up over and over and you're doing all kinds of crazy stuff, it still comes down to a dose-response relationship. And if you're hitting you're lucky enough in those groups that you're hitting the right dose for you to get the response you want, great. But for most of us in that situation, it's random and we have to get lucky. That's why we want to do with the principles, it's got to be specific and individual instead of large group hoping for the best. Hopefully all of that makes sense. I got a lot of things that we're going to expand on this. Hopefully you ask some questions so that we can do more. Do the work.